The dusty air of Farhaven Station clung thickly to the metallic walkway as Jace Callen stepped outside his humble repair shop, peering into a sky eternally tinted by the swirling dust storms of this distant moon. His boots scraped against the ground, leaving faint imprints in the settling powder. The subtle hum of overhead lights buzzed in a monotonous drone, blending with the faint chatter of alien travelers who wandered along the market strip in search of rare parts or questionable souvenirs. Jace ran a calloused hand over his unshaven jaw, gazing up at the half-broken sign that read Callen Repairs, its flickering neon letters reflecting the slow decay of his business. While Farhaven Station offered an out-of-the-way sanctuary for outcasts, smugglers, and occasional bounty hunters, it was far from the excitement Jace once craved. He had spent years crossing the galaxy, fixing advanced fighter ships and stealth cruisers in the heart of major starports, but harsh reality had whittled away his ambitions. Now, each day began and ended with the clank of battered hulls and the hiss of frayed cables, with only the sarcastic beep of his aging droid, Patch, to keep him company. Patch stood at Jace's side, a slender machine about half a meter tall, fashioned from leftover scrap. Its single optical sensor glowed a steady, disinterested blue. On most days, Patch's commentary provided more annoyance than assistance, but Jace had grown accustomed to its presence. At least, there was someone to talk to, even if that someone couldn't feel actual emotion or empathy. "Morning, Patch," Jace muttered, squinting into the gloom. A gust of wind kicked up another swirl of dust, blanketing his cropped brown hair in a film of gritty sand. Patch emitted a resigned hiss, then a mechanical chirp that translated into the language of cynicism. "If you intend to earn a living," the droid intoned, "perhaps you'd better hope for a customer more solvent than the last. The station's roster of misfits is not promising." Jace exhaled. No arguments there. He stepped back inside the half-collapsed roof that sheltered his workshop, surveying a sea of tools, half-finished contraptions, and engine parts. Rows of battered plating and tangled wires lined the shelves. He had done his best to keep the place organized, but a perpetual sense of chaos haunted every corner. "Time to get to work," he said, rolling up the sleeves of his grease-stained jacket. "That Ugran freighter isn't going to fix itself." As if on cue, an echoing thunderclap reverberated through the station's corridors, jolting him upright. A sudden draft of wind blew dust all around the hangar bay doors, swirling it into a choking cloud. Instinctively, Jace shielded his face, his heart pounding. "What in the cosmos was that?" he yelled, coughing. Patch's optical sensor flickered. "It would appear we have an unscheduled visitor." Jace pressed a button on the workshop wall, and the rusted doors began to slide open with a painful screech. Moments later, a starship emerged, battered and scorched, edges blackened with carbon scoring. Smoke trickled from one of its thrusters, leaving a residual trail across the yard. Its hull bore the faint insignia of an advanced design, though large sections were twisted beyond recognition. The vessel groaned as it landed, scraping against the floor. Panels popped and hissed, letting out the last breath of compressed atmosphere from inside. Jace had seen plenty of wrecks in his career, but this one radiated an undeniable aura of trouble. Caution told him to lock the doors, but curiosity and an opportunity for business commanded otherwise. After all, a job was a job. From a side hatch, sparks flew as it wrenched open. Smoke and fog spilled forth. A lone figure strode out, posture rigid and purposeful, clad in a strange combination of ceremonial armor and form-fitting flight gear. Their tall frame, tinted an emerald hue, glistened under the flickering lights of the hangar. Jace gulped. He recognized the species at once. Nixery, known for their warrior traditions and unyielding sense of honor. He also knew that Nixery rarely ventured into backwater outposts like this unless they carried a mission of utmost importance, or were on the run. Judging by the severity of the damage and the suspicious way she glanced around, it was likely both. "Who's in charge here?" The woman's voice resonated, crisp and unwavering, echoing in the half-empty hangar. Jace lifted a hand in greeting. "That would be me. I'm Jace Callen, the resident engineer." The woman's intense gaze flickered to Patch, then settled back on Jace. "I require immediate repairs," she declared, walking toward him. Her boots clicked against the hangar floor in time with the distant rumble of the station's generators. Spare me the details, just get it done quickly. My ship won't last another day without a full systems overhaul. Patch interjected with a curt beep and a transcribed message on the side of its chassis. You might want to be more specific, Captain. This place charges by the hour. Jace shot Patch a warning glare before turning his attention back to the warrior. I'll need to look at the damage in detail, he said, ignoring the droid's irreverence. Let's get her inside. I'll see what we can do. Without hesitation, she nodded. I am Captain Nyla Voss of the House of Voss. My presence is undisclosed. You will be compensated for your discretion. Jace gave a brief smile of understanding. Understood. Let's not broadcast this to the entire station then, yeah? Nyla turned, and Jace caught a glimpse of an impressive blade sheathed at her side. Elegant symbols ran the length of its hilt. He felt a pang of concern. A warrior, possibly injured or desperate, with a specialized blade, and in need of hush-hush repairs. He had experienced enough scrapes in his life to read trouble when he saw it. Still, the promise of money, or any form of compensation, was too valuable to let slip. The battered ship lurched forward, guided by a rudimentary tow system Jace deployed. Sparks scattered across the concrete as the hull scraped along, groaning in protest. Soon, the craft was situated beneath a canopy of mechanical arms and diagnostic arrays. Jace set to work calibrating the scanners, while Patch hovered around, sometimes scanning and sometimes swiping small components for later use. A holographic display sprang to life, flickering across the battered hull. Nyla hovered near, arms folded, her eyes narrowed. She carried herself with poise and tension, as though at any moment she might need to fight or flee. Jace did his best to ignore her unsettled presence, focusing on the damage. The results were grim: burned-out thrusters, compromised hull plating, and a severely damaged hyperdrive. This wasn't a quick patch job. It would require near-complete reconstruction of key systems. You've taken quite a beating, Jace murmured, assessing the readouts. Nothing I can't handle, she retorted sharply, then softened her tone. But time is of the essence. I can't remain hidden here for too long. Jace raised a brow. Hidden from whom? Her expression hardened. That's not your concern. With that, she turned and walked around the hangar, presumably to ensure the doors were locked. Jace exchanged a wary glance with Patch. All right, he whispered. It's definitely not normal for a Nixery warrior to be out here alone. Keep an eye on her, will you? Patch beeped in agreement, though an undercurrent of sarcasm laced its mechanical hum. But of course, Jace. If she decides to kill you, I'll be certain to record it for posterity. He sighed and dug into his toolbox, pulling out specialized welding gear. Before he could begin, the overhead lights flickered, and the entire workshop rattled from a deep, resounding hum. Alarms began to chirp from the console. Hyperdrive containment is unstable, Patch announced. Jace cursed under his breath. She wasn't kidding. One wrong move, and that drive could blow half the station. He called out to Nyla, who immediately snapped her attention to him. Captain, your hyperdrive is about to go critical. We have to stabilize it now. She rushed back, her emerald face paler than before. I was hoping to salvage it, but if you can't save the drive, just eject it. If we eject it in this state, it'll blow, and we'll be the first casualties, Jace replied, already rummaging for the right tools. We need to dampen the reaction. Then we can safely pull it out. Nyla nodded, her jaw set. Do what you must. Jace and Patch moved with a practiced urgency. Despite the tension, adrenaline sharpened Jace's senses. Welding arcs lit the workshop in rapid flashes, while scanners beeped warnings about the rising reactor temperature. At times, the heat from the panels forced Jace to step back. Finally, the faint whine that signaled a meltdown began to subside, replaced by the gentle crackle of cooling metal. Jace let out a slow breath, wiping sweat from his brow. That was close. Nyla stepped forward, her face a mask of mingled relief and impatience. How long will this take? I'll need at least 2 days, maybe 3, to get you operational. The hyperdrive's nearly toast. The warrior's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Jace thought she might lash out in frustration. Instead, she steadied her composure. Very well, 2 days, she answered. I'll require private quarters. Private quarters? Jace glanced around at the haphazard workshop. Well, I live above the shop. I've got a spare cot. It's not exactly a five-star suite. She brushed a lock of silver-tinted hair from her brow, her gaze unwavering. It will suffice. Unaccustomed to sharing his cramped quarters, Jace felt an uneasy twinge. But then again, it wasn't every day that a Nixery warrior crashed into his hangar. He motioned for her to follow him up a metal staircase that led to the loft. Patch beeped quietly. You're letting a fugitive warrior into your personal space? Bold strategy. Zip it, Jace hissed, climbing the steps. The loft was modest, a single room housing a cot, a small table, and a window overlooking the dusty horizon. Make yourself at home, Jace said, gesturing to the cot. I'll grab a spare blanket from the closet. Nyla stood in the middle of the room, her posture unrelenting, as though the concept of relaxation was foreign to her. I've slept in trenches before, she remarked, her voice tinged with a slight edge of vulnerability. Trenches, huh? Jace replied softly, handing her a folded blanket. You must have a story or two about that. She gave a curt nod, but offered no elaboration. Instead, she ran a hand across the hilt of her blade, as if reminding herself that it was still there. Jace noted the subtle scars running along her forearms, faint silver lines that spoke of a life lived in constant conflict. All right, he said, stepping back. I'll get back to the repairs. If you need anything, food, water, there's a small kitchenette down the hall. Try not to break anything or kill anyone. She pressed her lips into a thin line, likely suppressing a retort. He turned to leave, pausing momentarily at the threshold. The tension in the room was almost palpable. 1,000 questions swirled in his mind. Why was a Nixery warrior on the run? What caused such cataclysmic damage to her ship? And how dangerous was it for him to be helping her? But he tucked those questions away. For now, there was a job to be done, and he could sense that Captain Nyla Voss was not someone to be trifled with. He descended the stairs back into the workshop, bracing himself for the long hours ahead. Patch floated nearby, its sensor angled toward him like a curious observer. She is going to complicate your life, the droid remarked, its tone artificially soft. Maybe, Jace agreed. But that's the only way I earn my keep. With that, he pulled on his welding goggles and got to work, sparks flying in bright arcs around him. Outside, the dust storm roiled, draping the station in a haze of swirling red sand. Somewhere beyond that swirling mass, hidden foes or cosmic forces could be drawing closer, but for the moment, Jace's world was confined to the hiss of the welding torch and the drip of sweat across his brow. If only he knew how drastically this chance encounter would change the course of his life, he might have run straight into those swirling storms. But fate had already taken hold, and the quiet, unassuming life he had clung to was about to unravel in ways he could never have expected. Over the next several hours, Jace worked tirelessly on Captain Nyla's ship, forging replacement hull plates from the salvage he'd collected over the years, and carefully integrating them into the vessel's frame. Each time he tried to access the interior compartments, he encountered more signs of catastrophic battle: charred wiring, shattered conduits, and blast marks that hinted at a direct confrontation with powerful weaponry. Yet even as he painstakingly reconnected severed cables, he couldn't help but feel that the damage, though severe, was remarkably localized, almost as if someone had aimed precisely to incapacitate, not destroy. Patch assisted in its own roundabout manner, running diagnostics and uploading system schematics, occasionally making sardonic remarks about how primitive the station's equipment was. Jace waved off the droid's derision. He'd made do with limited resources for years and knew that skill and improvisation often mattered more than fancy gear. An ominous tension clung to the workshop air, thickening with each passing hour. Somewhere above, Nyla rested, or perhaps brooded over her predicament. Jace occasionally caught himself glancing up at the ceiling, wondering if she was pacing or sharpening her blade. He found himself oddly curious about her story, what sort of mission she was on, who she had angered, and why her craft bore the telltale scars of a laser-based assault instead of typical ballistic damage. By the time night fell across Farhaven Station, an occurrence marked more by a drop in temperature than any change in the sun's rays, Jace was exhausted. He shut down the main generator to let the ship's newly stabilized power core undergo a test cycle. Weariness tugged at his limbs, urging him to collapse on his fold-out cot in the corner of the workshop. But before he could so much as unroll a blanket, a voice called down from the loft. "Human," Nyla said. She descended the metal steps, expression as guarded as ever, though her eyes flicked to the starboard side of her ship. "Have you made any progress?" Jace wiped grease from his hands onto a rag. "I've patched most of the exterior hull. The hyperdrive's stable for now, but we'll need a replacement focusing matrix. I've rigged a temporary solution, but it won't hold for long-distance travel." Nyla nodded, her gaze drifting across the workshop. She carried herself with that same commanding air, but there was a subtle tremor in her stance. "Is there any chance of acquiring such a component here?" "Maybe," Jace replied, "but it'll cost. And I'm guessing you'd prefer not to draw attention to yourself, so we might need to handle it discreetly." She exhaled, the tension momentarily easing from her posture. "Do what must be done. I can pay, right?" he said, tossing the rag aside. "I'll see what I can negotiate tomorrow. For now, I recommend you stay low. There are a few unsavory types around who'd love to know they've got a Nixery warrior in their midst. People talk, especially if you flash too many credits." Her jaw tightened. "I am not accustomed to hiding." "Maybe not," Jace said gently. "But if you want to avoid complications, trust me on this. Farhaven's not exactly brimming with altruists." Nyla gave a curt nod. "Very well. I will remain here." He hesitated, then reached into a small thermal chest and produced a packet of dried rations. "You look like you could use a meal. I know it's not gourmet, but it's all I've got." Her eyes flashed in mild surprise, reflecting the overhead lights. She took the packet without a word and examined it carefully, like one might study an unfamiliar artifact. Then she lifted her gaze to his. For the briefest moment, Jace thought he saw something shift in her expression, a fleeting warmth or gratitude. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Thank you," she said at last. "I will remember this." Jace shrugged. "No problem. I'm going to crash for the night, if that's all right with you. The spare cot's yours if you want it." She glanced at the corner cot, then back to him. "You can sleep in here with me, unguarded. You place a great deal of trust in a stranger." "Not trust," he corrected, stifling a yawn. "Just exhaustion." With that, he sank onto his folding cot, pulled a threadbare blanket over himself, and closed his eyes. He heard Nyla cross the workshop floor with measured steps, then ascend to the loft. Moments later, the station's nighttime hum settled into its usual cadence, a gentle lullaby of distant machinery. Though the presence of a heavily armed Nixery warrior in the same building would have unnerved him under normal circumstances, Jace was too worn out to fret. He drifted into a deep sleep, lulled by the knowledge that, at least for now, neither of them had reason to harm the other. Morning came all too soon, heralded by the hiss of the ventilation system and the distant clang of cargo loaders across the station. Jace felt the familiar ache in his muscles as he pushed himself upright, squinting at the overhead lights. The air smelled faintly of engine grease and ozone. He quickly dressed, splashing his face at a makeshift sink in the corner, then turned to Patch, who lay in standby mode near the console. "Wake up, bucket of bolts," he called, flicking a switch on the droid's casing. Patch's optical sensor lit up with a bleary blue glow. "Good morning, Jace," it droned. "I trust you slept well in this monument to disorganization." Nyla, already awake, descended the steps, blade at her hip. "I heard movement outside just a moment ago," she announced quietly. "Someone's near the building." Jace tensed, but forced a casual shrug. "Probably just station riffraff, or a courier. I get supply deliveries sometimes." With a decisive nod, Nyla moved to the side hatch of the hangar, peering through a narrow viewport. Jace followed, noticing the flicker of caution in her eyes. His pulse quickened. If she was worried, there might be a real threat. The metal door clanged once, then again. A muffled voice called from outside. "Hey, Callen, you in there?" Jace relaxed, at least marginally. He recognized the gravelly tone of Mox Farron, one of the local parts dealers. "It's just Mox," he said, exhaling. But Nyla didn't budge from her alert stance. Jace pressed the controls to open the door a crack, revealing a squat, round-faced man with a patchy beard and a wide grin. Mox wore a tattered vest over a grimy shirt and clutched a handheld datapad. "Morning, Jace," he said, stepping forward and craning his neck to peer inside. "I got that shipment of circuit boards you asked for. Thought you might want to see what else I have in stock." "Sure, come on in," Jace replied, moving aside. He spared a quick glance at Nyla, whose hand lingered near the hilt of her blade. Mox waddled into the workshop, his eyes lighting up when he caught sight of the battered Starship. Whoa, what do we have here? That's quite a wreck. Big job. Yeah, big job. Jace echoed, trying to sound nonchalant. Don't worry about it. We can talk business over here. He subtly angled Mox away from Nyla, guiding him toward a side table covered in random parts. Mox, however, was a curious soul, and his gaze wandered back to the Starship. That insignia looks Nixery, if I'm not mistaken. How'd you land a customer like? Jace planted a firm hand on Mox's shoulder. Let's focus on those circuit boards, yeah? I'm in a hurry. He reached into his pocket and retrieved a few credit chits. I'm also looking for a focusing matrix, type LX, 9 or similar. Mox's eyebrows rose. LX9? That's top shelf. Not exactly the kind of part you find rummaging in scrap heaps. Gonna cost you. He tapped on his datapad, eyes darting across the screen. You're in luck, though? I might know someone who has one for sale. Won't be cheap, or easy to get. You sure you want it? Jace nodded firmly. I need it. Name your price. A smirk tugged at Mox's lips. 20,000 credits. Jace nearly choked. That's robbery. You know I don't have that lying around. Mox shrugged. It's a rare piece, Jace. If you want something more affordable, you'll have to do a bit of scavenging, or maybe wait until someone else tries to offload one. Unless, of course, your new customers got pockets deeper than the canyons of Reckler. Uncertain how much Nyla was willing to invest, or how many credits she actually possessed, Jace glanced her way. She was standing near the Starship, arms folded. When she caught his eye, he gave her a slight nod. She inclined her head and approached, her posture commanding. How much? She asked, looking Mox straight in the eye. 20,000, Mox repeated, an edge of confidence creeping into his voice. If you want the part without complications. For a moment, Nyla simply stared at him. Then she reached into a hidden compartment in her armor and produced a small metallic crest studded with what appeared to be a singular gemstone. She laid it on the table. This is a Voss family crest, carved from Xarian crystal. It's worth far more than 20,000. Mox blinked, all flickering across his features. He reached out as if to touch it, but pulled back, almost reverently. That's quite something. Sell it, Nyla said curtly, her gaze never wavering. Use the profit to purchase the matrix for me. Keep the excess if you must, but if you betray me, I'll know. A chill settled over the workshop, and Mox found himself swallowing hard. Right, of course. I can set it up. Might take a day or two. One day, Nyla specified, her voice icy. Mox managed a shaky nod, then pocketed the crest with care. You got it. I'll, reach out to my contacts right away. He cast a sideways glance at Jace. I'll bring the circuit boards by later. For now, I'd better get moving. Jace watched him waddle out of the workshop, a mix of relief and unease tumbling through his gut. Mox was a hustler, but generally reliable. Still, the crest Nyla had given him looked like an item of immense personal value. He wondered if it might be traced, or if it signified something among the Nixery that could cause trouble. As soon as Mox was gone, Nyla turned to Jace. You have questions, she stated. He rubbed the back of his neck. Plenty, but I'm not sure you want to answer them. She studied him for a moment. I am grateful for your assistance, but certain matters remain confidential. No argument there, he said. Look, once the part arrives, I'll install it. We'll get you on your way. Until then, you might as well make yourself comfortable. To his surprise, Nyla let out a quiet, weary sigh. It was the first time he'd seen her shoulders slump, if only a little. I've been running for a long time, Callen, she said, her voice low. The chance to rest, even briefly, is a luxury. He nodded, unsure how to respond. Part of him wanted to reassure her, to say something comforting, but the stoic set of her features suggested she wouldn't appreciate pity. They spent the rest of the day in tense companionship. Jace continued patching up the ship's secondary systems while Nyla stood guard or paced around the hangar, occasionally asking about the station's layout or the local black market. She seemed to be gathering intel, always planning her next move. Patch, true to form, offered the occasional quip or beep that Nyla mostly ignored. It was late afternoon when a distant rumble shook the workshop, rattling loose tools off a nearby table. Jace froze, exchanging a concerned glance with Patch. That sounded like an explosion, Nyla finished, hand already on her blade. I'll check outside. She sprinted to the front, flinging the hangar door wide just as plumes of black smoke billowed upward from the far side of the station. Alarm klaxons wailed in discordant chorus. Overhead, the swirling dust clouds glowed orange with reflected flames. Great, Jace muttered. Just what we need. By the time he and Nyla reached the threshold, frantic shouts and the clatter of running footsteps echoed through the corridors. A handful of station residents rushed past, fear stark in their eyes. Jace spotted Mox among them, face ashen. What happened? Jace called out. Mox paused, gulping lungfuls of air. Some kind of strike team. It's not local. They bombed the eastern docking bay. They're moving through the station, searching for someone. They've got advanced gear. They're unstoppable. Jace felt a cold dread seep into his veins. He turned to Nyla, who stood rigid, her expression darkening. They're after me, she said, voice tight. No doubt about it. I knew I didn't have much time. Mox stared at her, realization dawning on his face. You're the reason they're here? Nyla didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed Jace's arm, urgency sparking in her eyes. We need to leave, immediately. Your ship's not ready, Jace objected. We still need the focusing matrix. She cursed under her breath. Is there another way off this rock? He shook his head. Not one that can outrun a strike team like that. Your ship's our best chance, but without the focusing matrix, we can't jump to hyperspace. Nyla's gaze darted toward the rising smoke. Then we must buy ourselves time. Can you barricade this place? Jace hesitated, thoughts racing. The workshop had a few security measures, reinforced doors, some shield plating, but nothing that could stand against a dedicated assault force. Not for long, he admitted. But maybe we can fortify the entrance and hold them off until the Matrix arrives. Mox, can you? But Mox had already bolted, no doubt trying to save his own skin. Jace cursed and turned to Nyla. All right, let's do what we can. Patch, lock down the doors and activate the emergency barrier. Patch beeped compliance, and the heavy hangar doors slid shut with a resonant clang. A soft hum signaled the activation of a shield emitter, an improvised device Jace had salvaged from an old star freighter. It wouldn't last forever, but it might deter a few blaster shots. Nyla took position by a side window, peering through the smoky haze. They'll come, and when they do, they won't relent. Not until I'm dead. Jace swallowed hard, adrenaline pulsing through him. This was exactly the kind of trouble he had hoped to avoid when he settled here. But now he was in too deep to back out. Then we make sure they don't get that chance, he said, heading for a crate of improvised weapons, stun grenades, old pulse rifles, and a few homemade contraptions that might or might not work. Patch hovered anxiously. Jace, the shields will hold for a short time, but these intruders have advanced weaponry. Our odds of survival are. Jace tightened his grip on a pulse rifle. Don't tell me. I'm sure they're not great, but we don't have any other option. Nyla drew her blade, its etched symbols shimmering ominously. I will stand. Honor demands it. Before Jace could respond, a thunderous blast rocked the hangar, sending spiderweb cracks through the walls. Sparks rained from the ceiling, and a shrill alarm tore through the air. Patch's sensor spun wildly. They're here, the droid announced, stating the obvious. Jace's heart hammered. He glanced at Nyla, who lifted her chin, eyes blazing. Fight well, human, she said quietly, shifting into a battle-ready stance. Steadying his weapon, Jace nodded. Let's give them a warm welcome. Outside, through the haze of smoke, silhouettes emerged, figures clad in sleek, dark armor, moving with lethal precision. They carried energy rifles that whined with suppressed power. Jace clenched his teeth, wondering who they were. Military? Mercenaries? Or something else entirely? They aimed at the hangar doors, firing blasts of focused energy that crackled against the shield barrier. Inside, the workshop lights flickered as the emitter struggled to maintain power. Patch, Jace barked. Reroute power from the backup generator. We need every bit of juice we can get. The droid beeped and zipped over to a control panel. Doing so now? Prepare for potential system overload. A second volley struck, and the shield flared violently, flickering on the verge of collapse. Nyla didn't wait. She pressed a button on the control panel, and a hidden hatch slid open in the hangar door, just large enough to slip through. She darted out, moving like a specter in the swirling dust, her blade slicing through the air as she lunged at the nearest attacker. Jace cursed and followed her lead, adrenaline fueling him. He fired wild pulses from his rifle, forcing the intruders to duck behind crates or retreat behind the station's rusted architecture. The entire corridor echoed with the shriek of energy blasts and the dull thud of grenades. Captain Nyla was a sight to behold. Her blade gleamed with a faint luminescence, leaving an afterimage in Jace's vision each time she struck. She dodged incoming fire with uncanny agility, at times deflecting shots with her sword, sparks dancing across the air as metal met plasma. One by one, the armored figures fell or scrambled back, clearly not expecting such fierce resistance. Yet more of them emerged, and Jace realized the strike team was larger than he'd hoped, perhaps a dozen or more. He pressed himself against a scorched bulkhead for cover, panting, heart pounding like a war drum. "Nyla," he yelled over the din. "We're outnumbered." She dispatched 2 more with a fluid slash, then whirled around, her eyes lit with an almost feverish energy. "Then we'll even the odds." Her gaze locked onto a cluster of volatile fuel cells stored near the far end of the corridor. Jace spotted them too, and his eyes widened. "That's your plan." She nodded, hurling a short-range explosive toward the cluster. Jace ducked, covering his head. A blinding flash erupted as the fuel cells detonated, sending a searing wave of heat through the corridor. The shockwave swept several attackers off their feet, hurling them against the walls. For a moment, the entire station seemed to quake under the force of the blast. Smoke poured in thick plumes, and bits of debris rained down like comet fragments. Jace coughed, struggling to clear his vision. Then he felt a strong grip on his arm. Nyla, dragging him back toward the workshop. "Get inside," she urged, voice hoarse. "We've slowed them down, but they'll regroup." They stumbled back into the hangar, sealing the doors behind them. Jace sagged against the wall, pulse hammering, dust coating his face. Nyla's breathing was ragged, though she still clutched her blade with a white-knuckled grip. Patch hovered near, scanning them for injuries. Minor lacerations, contusions, elevated heart rate. No immediate life-threatening wounds detected. "Jace, your left shoulder is singed. Captain, your armor plating is cracked in 3 places. Thanks for the update," Jace muttered, wincing as he noticed the burn on his shoulder. Nyla's armor, once pristine, was scorched and dented, flecks of emerald skin showing through tears in the material. "Now what?" she asked, leveling a grim look at Jace. "They'll breach soon enough, no matter how many bombs we throw at them." Jace clenched his fists, feeling frustration and desperation war within him. "We need that focusing matrix. We have to contact Mox or find another way." Even as he spoke, a faint beeping emanated from the workshop console. Patch floated over, analyzing the signals. "Incoming transmission from Mox Farron," the droid announced. Nyla and Jace rushed to the console, battered and coughing. The display flickered, revealing Mox's anxious face. Explosions and shouts formed the chaotic background of his feed. "Jace, good news, I got it. The Matrix." "Bad news, I'm pinned down at the western airlock by these lunatics. They're tearing the station apart. If you want the part, you'll have to come get it." Jace glanced at Nyla, who set her jaw. "Send your coordinates, Mox. We're on our way." "Coordinates sent." "Hurry," Mox yelped, ducking as a stray blast scorched the metal behind him. The transmission cut off abruptly. Nyla snatched her blade, turning to Jace. "We go together. Retrieve the part, return here, and finish the repairs." "Agreed," Jace said, steeling himself. "But we'll have to be careful. That route's going to be crawling with hostiles." Patch beeped. "I will remain here and maintain the shield, correct?" "Yes," Jace nodded. "If the hangar gets compromised, everything's lost." The droid's optical sensor dimmed momentarily in what might have been apprehension. "Then do be cautious, Jace. I prefer having a living employer." Jace let out a wry smirk, then turned to Nyla. "All right, Captain. Let's move." They slipped through a smaller maintenance hatch in the rear of the workshop, emerging into a labyrinth of narrow service tunnels lit by flickering emergency lights. The air was stale, heavy with smoke and the metallic tang of fear. Here and there, they passed wounded station inhabitants huddling in corners, too terrified to do more than watch as the heavily armed intruders roamed the main corridors. In hushed tones, Jace guided Nyla through back routes he'd learned during his years of scavenging. They dodged patrols by listening for the clank of boots and the sizzle of plasma rifles. Whenever they heard the telltale hum of approaching soldiers, they ducked into side passages. The tension weighed like a gravitic pull on their chests, intensifying with each step. Finally, they reached the western airlock, a high-ceilinged chamber that once served as a minor docking bay. Flames danced along ruptured piping, and sparks rained from severed cables. Huddled behind a half-collapsed crate was Mox, clutching a small case like it was his last lifeline. "Mox," Jace hissed, gesturing for him to come closer. Mox looked up, relief flooding his face. He scrambled over, still clutching the case. "You actually showed. This thing," he tapped the case. "This is what you need. LX-9 brand new. Managed to trade that crest for it. But watch out, there are a bunch of those soldiers right outside that door." Nyla peered around the corridor, her emerald skin glistening with sweat and soot. She caught sight of 3 figures in dark armor, methodically sweeping the area for survivors. She glanced at Jace and Mox. "One of you grab the Matrix. I'll draw their fire." Before Jace could protest, Nyla sprinted forward, blade held at the ready. She let out a fierce cry that startled the intruders, who whirled around to face her. Their plasma shots streaked the air with brilliant blue arcs, but Nyla dodged most and deflected others, dancing among them with a lethal grace. "Now's our chance," Mox urged, shoving the case into Jace's arms. "Go." Jace clutched the Matrix case, heart pounding. He'd never seen such raw combat skill. But as formidable as Nyla was, he doubted she could hold off an entire squad alone. "We can't just leave her," he whispered. "She'll be fine," Mox snapped. "We need to get that part back to your workshop so you can fix her ship. That's the only way out of this mess." Jace's stomach churned, torn between wanting to help and knowing he'd probably just get in the way. Another volley of plasma bolts seared the air, illuminating the corridor in harsh flashes. Nyla's blade moved so quickly it seemed almost alive. One soldier collapsed with a strangled cry, while another stumbled back with a damaged visor. But more reinforcements were on the way. Jace could hear the thunder of heavy boots. "Go," Nyla shouted, slashing through a third attacker's weapon. "I'll catch up." Gritting his teeth, Jace nodded reluctantly, then darted away, Mox trailing close behind. The pair retraced their steps through the winding service tunnels, the case with the focusing matrix clutched tight against Jace's chest. Every second felt like a precarious eternity as they dodged more roving patrols and stray blasts. At last, they emerged near the workshop's rear entrance, panting. Patch immediately disengaged the security locks, allowing them inside. Jace rushed to the console, carefully setting down the case. His hands shook as he input commands, adrenaline surging through his veins. "Patch, open the container and confirm the part," he ordered. Patch's mechanical arm whirred, prying open the sleek metal box. Inside rested a cylindrical device with intricate markings, glowing faintly with an internal power field. The droid scanned it, then beeped affirmatively. "Matrix confirmed. LX-9 series, fully functional." "Good," Jace breathed. "Let's install it." "Where's Nyla?" Mox shrugged helplessly. "She was still fighting off those soldiers when we ran. I don't know what happened after that." "She's probably in trouble," Jace said, worry gnawing at him. "I can't just leave her out there." "Look, I get it. But if you don't fix that ship, we're all dead," Mox argued, glancing nervously at the sealed hangar doors. "This station is effectively under siege. The only way out is that Nixery vessel." Jace hated to admit it, but Mox was right. If Nyla couldn't return, or if she were captured, none of them would stand a chance anyway. "Fine," he said, swallowing hard. "Patch, you work on installing the Matrix. I'll handle any mechanical adjustments needed." Patch hummed. "Installation requires significant modifications to the existing drive assembly. I cannot complete them alone." Mox shifted from foot to foot, his eyes darting around. "Then I'll keep watch at the door. You two handle the repairs." Jace nodded, pushing aside his fear for Nyla and focusing on the task at hand. With deft hands, he began removing the damaged components from the ship's hyperdrive assembly. The engineering challenge was immense, integrating a high-end focusing matrix into a battered system that had barely survived an earlier meltdown. But Jace had a gift for patchwork solutions, for turning mismatched parts into something that functioned, if only for a while. Time blurred as he and Patch worked in tandem, splicing wires, calibrating power feeds, and aligning the matrix. The hangar reverberated with muffled blasts and distant screams, the sound of war creeping closer. Despite the chaos, Jace poured every ounce of skill into the installation. Sweat trickled into his eyes, and his hands trembled from fatigue, but he pressed on, driven by a desperate desire to survive and to see Nyla return. Finally, Patch let out a triumphant series of beeps. Matrix stabilized. Preliminary tests indicate that the hyperdrive is functional, though maximum efficiency is uncertain. Jace slumped against the hull, exhaling in relief. We'll take uncertain if it means we can jump. A thunderous crash from the corridor spun them around. Mox let out a cry of alarm, diving away from the door. The hangar doors shook violently as something huge slammed against them from outside. The improvised shield emitter crackled under the strain. Patch beeped frantically. Multiple life forms detected, armed with heavy weaponry. The shield is failing. Before Jace could react, the battered doors burst inward with a screech of torn metal. Sparks flew in every direction as the shield flickered and died. Smoke billowed in, revealing a towering figure clad in dark, ornate armor. Unlike the others, this one moved with an air of command and cold precision. Their face was hidden behind a polished visor. Behind the armored leader came at least half a dozen more soldiers. They fanned out, weapons trained on Jace, Mox, and Patch. "Don't move," the leader intoned, voice distorted by some mechanical filter. Jace raised his hand slowly, a surge of panic gripping him. He glanced at the Starship, so tantalizingly close to completion, and then back at the intruders. "Where is Captain Nyla Voss?" demanded the armored leader. "Surrender her, and we may spare your miserable lives." Jace's mind raced. There was no sign of Nyla, no miraculous arrival to save them. For all he knew, she could be incapacitated or worse. And yet, the alternative was unthinkable. "We don't know," Jace managed, trying to maintain composure. She left. The leader's visor angled toward the Starship, scanning it with clear suspicion. "That vessel belongs to the House of Voss. You are aiding a fugitive and a thief." "Thief?" Mox repeated, bewildered. "She possesses stolen military secrets," the leader snarled. "Secrets that belong to a power far greater than any of you. Now, last chance, where is she?" Jace felt a wave of hopelessness crest over him. Even if he confessed everything, these soldiers had no reason to let him live. They wanted Nyla, and if they discovered she wasn't here, they'd probably execute them all out of spite. Suddenly, a flash of emerald caught his eye. From a maintenance hatch on the far side of the hangar, Nyla burst into view, battered but unbroken. Blood trickled from a cut on her brow, and her armor hung in ragged pieces, but her blade still shone with lethal intent. A stunned hush fell as she stepped forward. Even the soldiers hesitated a moment, seemingly taken aback by her sheer presence. "You," the leader hissed. "Surrender now, and your companions might yet live." Nyla's gaze flickered to Jace, then back to the leader. "I surrender to no one." Without another word, she lunged. The leader unleashed a barrage of plasma bolts, but Nyla weaved through them, deflecting or dodging with superhuman grace. The rest of the squad reacted too slowly, their coordinated assault faltering as she tore into their ranks like a living storm. "Go, Jace," she shouted between strikes. "Get on the ship." Mox and Patch needed no further urging. They scrambled up the loading ramp into the cockpit area, while Jace hesitated for a split second, heart pounding. Then he followed, trusting Nyla to hold them off. Inside the cockpit, alarms blared, indicating an external assault on the hull. The newly installed hyperdrive controls glowed faintly, still in diagnostic mode. Jace slid into the pilot's seat, quickly scanning the readouts. The power levels flickered uncertainly, but the system was online. Outside, Nyla's battle cry echoed, punctuated by the clash of steel and the sharp report of energy blasts. The workshop shuddered as more debris fell. Jace knew time was almost up. "Patch, start the launch sequence," he ordered, flipping switches to initiate the thrusters. The engines sputtered for a moment, then roared to life, vibrations rattling the cockpit. Mox clung to a chair, eyes wide with terror. "Where's Nyla?" Mox asked, voice trembling. Jace gritted his teeth. "We can't leave without her." As if answering his plea, Nyla vaulted into the ship's open cargo ramp, landing in a heap. Her sword clattered to the floor, and smoke curled from scorched portions of her armor. She staggered to her feet, just as a volley of plasma fire tore into the bulkhead behind her, sending sparks cascading. "They're overrunning the hangar," she gasped. "We must depart now." Jace wasted no time, slamming the ramp controls. The cargo door hissed shut, sealing out the furious shouts of the soldiers. The cockpit's sensors lit up with red alerts as additional blasts struck the ship's exterior. "Brace yourselves," he shouted. "This is going to be rough." With that, he fired the thrusters to full power, and the battered vessel lurched off the workshop floor, engines screaming in protest. The hangar's ceiling loomed, a cluster of girders and sealed panels. At the last second, Jace engaged a manual override for the roof exit, blowing apart the old station plating. In a hail of twisting metal, the ship rocketed skyward, trailing smoke and sparks. G-forces pressed them into their seats as they broke through Farhaven's thin atmosphere. Alarms blared incessantly, but Jace kept the throttle open, pushing the craft to its limits. The swirling dust clouds parted, revealing the starry expanse beyond. For one harrowing moment, a flash of pale fire streaked past the viewport, surface-to-air weapons, no doubt. But the next barrage missed, and then they were free, rocketing away from the station into the black void of space. Nyla collapsed against the cockpit wall, breathing heavily. Her emerald face was drawn with pain, yet her eyes gleamed with fierce triumph. Mox slumped, letting out a ragged laugh of relief, while Patch busied itself shutting down non-essential alarms. Jace tapped the controls, checking the hyperdrive readouts. The Matrix was stabilizing, but not fully charged. "We need to get further from the planet's gravity well before we can jump," he said. Nyla nodded, pushing herself upright despite obvious wounds. "Set a course for the edge of the system. We'll decide our next move once we're safely away." As Jace guided the ship on a course away from Farhaven, a swirl of conflicting emotions churned within him. Relief at their narrow escape, fear of the unknown forces that had attacked them, and a cautious curiosity about this warrior who wielded her blade like a living legend. He also couldn't ignore the pang of regret for leaving the only life he'd known behind. His workshop, his meager possessions, the small semblance of peace. Yet something told him that from this moment on, peace would be a luxury he could rarely afford. Captain Nyla Voss, wounded but unbowed, had brought him into a realm of secrets, military conspiracies, and a destiny he couldn't yet fathom. Charting a course, Jace murmured, hands trembling on the throttle. And so it begins. Outside the cockpit windows, the endless stretch of starlight shimmered like a beckoning gateway. Yet Jace knew they weren't free of danger just because they'd left Farhaven behind. He could almost feel the tension in the pressurized cabin, thick enough to taste. Beside him, Nyla gripped the co-pilot's seat, her emerald skin slick with sweat and her breaths ragged. Meanwhile, Mox fussed over a makeshift bandage on his forearm, and Patch hovered near the control panel, tracking the damage readouts on the battered Starship. Engaging hyperdrive in 30 seconds, Patch intoned, its mechanical voice oddly calm for the dire straits they were in. Nyla locked her gaze on Jace. "Our pursuers won't be far behind. If they have any long-range cruisers or carrier ships in orbit, we risk an intercept." Jace checked the sensor array. Sure enough, multiple blips of unknown vessels flickered into range. A half-dozen or more starships, each armed with enough firepower to shred their rickety craft. He set his jaw. "We just have to hope the new focusing matrix does its job. Once we jump, they'll have a hard time tracking us." Nyla nodded, though her eyes never left the sensor readout. Coordinates. Jace hesitated. They needed a safe haven, a place to regroup and plan their next steps. But they had none. "Somewhere off the main trade routes," he suggested. "Maybe the Cora Rift Belt? It's remote, riddled with asteroid fields that can cloak our signature." "Do it," Nyla said softly, then winced, pressing a hand to a scorched patch of skin on her shoulder. She had taken a direct hit in the fray and was running on sheer adrenaline. The Starship shuddered as Jace keyed in the coordinates. A hollow hum built beneath the deck plating, growing in intensity until the entire vessel vibrated. Mox clutched a railing, looking pale. "This crate better hold together." "Cross your fingers," Jace muttered. "We're out of time." Outside, the sensor screen lit up with an alert. Enemy ships closing fast. A volley of streaking light soared past them, missing by mere meters. Jace yanked the hyperdrive lever, and the swirling tapestry of stars stretched into bright lines. In a roaring jolt, the starship leapt into hyperspace, leaving the attackers behind. A collective exhale swept through the cockpit. For several heartbeats, no one spoke, the only sound the rhythmic beeping of the console. Jace's muscles ached as if he'd run a marathon, and he realized how tightly he'd been gripping the controls. Finally, Mox let out a shaky laugh. We made it. We actually made it. He turned to Nyla with a grin that quickly faded at the sight of her injuries. You need medical attention. Nyla shrugged him off, though her face was drawn with pain. I've had worse. What I need is a plan to stop those who pursue me. Jace turned in his chair. All right, no more secrets. I think we deserve to know what's really going on. Who were those people, and what do they want with you? A flicker of hesitation crossed Nyla's features. Her gaze dropped to the floor. They are part of my father's private forces, she said quietly. He commands the Onyx Dominion, an empire that spans multiple systems. My people, the Nixery, may look like proud warriors to you, but in the wrong hands, our military traditions become tools of oppression. She paused, eyes distant. My father, High Lord Turan Voss, governs with an iron fist, though the galaxy sees only the respectable facade of a diplomatic monarchy. I learned of a plot he orchestrated. The Dominion intends to unleash a new wave of subjugation, driven by advanced stealth and infiltration technologies. I discovered the proof in the form of stolen data and fled. Mox's jaw dropped. You're saying this is bigger than a personal grudge? It's a full-scale conspiracy. Nyla nodded. Yes. The data I carry exposes the Dominion's secret arsenal. If disseminated, it could spark rebellion among my father's vassal worlds. That's why he's desperate to recapture me. Jace rubbed his temples. So he's basically sending an entire army after you. To keep these secrets buried? That is correct, she said, her voice a touch ragged. And if he recovers me, he'll ensure I never leave again. I am his daughter, and his best soldier in his eyes. But my loyalty to the Nixery code outweighs blood ties. Silence fell, punctuated by the hum of hyperspace travel. Mox looked uneasy. Sounds like we're in the thick of something huge, Jace. Are we sure we want to keep helping? Jace cast a thoughtful glance at Nyla. I'm not the type to ditch someone in trouble. Besides, those goons already tried to kill me. I'm involved whether I like it or not. Patch beeped, drawing everyone's attention to the NAV computer. Hyperspace path is stable. Arrival at Cora Rift Belt in approximately 10 hours. Suggest shifting to autopilot and initiating repairs. Nyla exhaled, leaning back against the co-pilot's seat. 10 hours. I can finally rest. Her eyelids fluttered, and she seemed on the verge of passing out. Easy, Jace said gently. We'll get you patched up. Mox, see if you can find a medkit in the aft compartment. As Mox left, Jace glanced at Nyla, torn between admiration for her courage and worry about the storm she'd brought into his life. At last, he helped her up and guided her into the ship's modest sleeping berth, where she slumped onto a bunk. Stay still, he said softly. Let me see that wound. She nodded, her usual stoicism faltering. You have my thanks, Jace Callen. He mustered a faint smile. You're welcome, Captain. Rest. We'll figure this out. In truth, he didn't know how they would. But for now, the confines of hyperspace offered a fleeting sanctuary from the Onyx Dominion's relentless reach. When they dropped out of hyperspace, the Cora Rift Belt lay before them, a dark sea of asteroids swirling around a cluster of fragmented planetoids. Flashes of latent energy arced among the debris, a cosmic phenomenon known to baffle sensors and hamper communications. Perfect for hiding, if you didn't mind the constant threat of colliding with space rocks or sparking cosmic fields. Engaging sublight engines, Jace murmured, easing the battered starship forward. The cockpit vibrated, protesting the prolonged flight. As they navigated deeper into the drift, an eerie glow bathed the hull, and sensor readings became unreliable. Nonetheless, it was far from the Dominion's prying eyes. Nyla joined him, looking steadier but still showing signs of strain. She gazed out at the drifting asteroids. This place is dangerous. Yeah, Jace agreed. But it beats being shot at, right? She allowed a hint of a smirk. Debatable. In the back, Mox clambered around, trying to secure loose crates, while Patch connected to the ship's communication array, scanning for any signals that might pierce the rift's interference. Minimal transmissions detected, the droid announced. I am, however, picking up a low-power beacon on the far side of the belt. Jace frowned. A beacon? Could be a distress call or a hidden outpost. We might find supplies or trouble. We should investigate, Nyla said. Our resources are running low, especially fuel. If there's a chance of replenishing or forging alliances, we can't ignore it. Mox made a face. You sure about that? What if it's a trap? We'll be cautious, Jace decided, setting a course toward the faint signal. Carefully weaving through the drift, they approached what appeared to be a cluster of hollowed-out asteroids, each one glowing with faint, bioluminescent markings. Then a tiny planetoid came into view, its surface dotted with crystalline spires that glimmered with an otherworldly light. As they neared, the ship's sensors regained partial functionality, pinging the presence of artificial structures on the surface. I see some sort of landing platform, Jace said, squinting at the readings. It's got minimal power, but it should be enough for us to set down. Nyla nodded. Let's do it. The landing was surprisingly smooth, aided by the planetoid's light gravity. Outside the ship, a thick, purplish atmosphere stirred in gentle breezes, illuminated by the phosphorescent crystals embedded in the rock. The group disembarked, stepping onto a stone platform that seemed carved by hand, its edges inscribed with swirling glyphs. Looks deserted, Mox muttered, peering into the gloom. Creepy place. Jace agreed. The only sound was the soft pulse of energy coursing through the crystals. Patch hovered near, scanning the environment, detecting faint life signs deeper within the structure. It reported, pointing a slender arm toward a recessed tunnel in the rock. Nyla led the way, sword at her side, though she appeared wary of further conflict. Jace followed, pulse quickening as they descended into the subterranean corridors. Flickering lights danced across the walls, which were etched with spiraling patterns reminiscent of ancient runes. After a short walk, they emerged into a cavernous chamber lit by a giant crystal formation at its center. Dozens of robed figures stood in a circle, their skin a pale lavender hue. They turned in unison to face the newcomers, revealing eyes that shimmered like liquid silver. One figure stepped forward, arms raised in a gesture of greeting. Their voice resonated softly, though Jace couldn't see their mouth move. Welcome, travelers. We sensed your arrival in the rift. Do not be afraid. We have waited for this moment. Jace and his companions exchanged uncertain glances. Waited for us? Jace repeated. I'm not sure I follow. The robed figure smiled, revealing a faint glow behind translucent lips. You come bearing the mark of destiny. They gestured to Jace specifically. The prophecy of the Radiant Maker speaks of a visitor from beyond the stars, one who would unite the warring factions and bring balance. You, Jace Callen, are he. Jace's jaw dropped. Me? Whoa, hold on. I'm just a mechanic. You must have the wrong guy. Another robed individual approached, extending a delicate hand. We know your name. Your arrival was foretold in the ancient crystals. The energy that emanates from your starship confirms it. Someone with the skill to mend what is broken and the heart to save our people. Mox rubbed his eyes in disbelief. I must be dreaming. Patch beeped quietly, scanning the robed figures. They appear to have significant psionic abilities. Their readings are unusual. Nyla's expression hardened. We're in hiding from a hostile force. I don't know about any prophecy, but if you can aid us, we would be grateful. A soft murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. The lead figure, perhaps a priest or elder, inclined their head. Yes, we can provide you with resources, fuel, supplies. But in return, we humbly request you fulfill the ancient prophecy. Jace felt his cheeks flush. He'd never been called a savior before. What exactly does that entail? The elder's silver eyes glowed brighter. Long have we anticipated the chosen one, who would stand against the looming darkness of the Onyx Dominion. Our seers have glimpsed the rise of a great war in the cosmos. Only with the help of the Radiant Maker can the tide be turned. Nyla spoke up. You realize our enemies are already searching for us. If you shelter us, you'll be in danger. The elder nodded solemnly. We understand. But the crystals have guided us through countless generations. We do not fear the storms of war as long as we stand with the prophesied champion. In the hush that followed, Jace could almost hear his own heartbeat. Though he'd always scorned talk of fate, Seeing these ethereal beings so utterly convinced made him pause. He glanced at Nyla, who wore a mixture of skepticism and reluctant acceptance. "This is your choice, Jace," she said quietly. "I've seen you improvise miracles with junk parts. Maybe you are destined for something bigger." He swallowed, searching for words. "Look, I'm just trying to survive. But if it means saving lives, if it means stopping your father's tyranny, then count me in. But I'm not a warrior or a saint. I'm just good at fixing things." A faint, collective sigh seemed to pass through the robed assembly. The elder offered a serene smile. "Even the greatest tapestry begins with a single thread." Mox snorted. "That's poetic. But we're going to need more than poetry if the Onyx Dominion shows up." "They will come," Nyla warned. "We must be ready." "Indeed," the elder said. "Come, let us share our resources. We will prepare for the battles ahead." As days turned into weeks, Jace found himself in a whirlwind of activity. The robed inhabitants, who called themselves the Seraphine, revealed hidden shipyards built into the craggy depths of the planetoid. Their technology was ancient but surprisingly advanced, powered by the planet's unique crystal formations. Working side by side with them, Jace helped retrofit the battered Nixery vessel, installing stealth generators and advanced shielding derived from crystal energy. Meanwhile, Nyla recovered from her wounds, training daily in sparring arenas carved from the rock. The Seraphine warriors, though fewer in number, possessed uncanny Psyblade techniques that harmonized with Nyla's martial prowess. She combined their teachings with her own blade art, forging a style that transcended her previous limits. Mox assisted by coordinating supply routes, forging deals with fringe traders who braved the Korra Rift Belt. Patch proved invaluable in bridging the gap between Seraphine tech and the Starship's mainframe. Despite the bizarre circumstances, Jace felt an odd sense of belonging amid these underground halls. He was, for the first time in years, part of something bigger than himself. Yet all the while, a shadow loomed. The knowledge that the Onyx Dominion continued to expand its reach. Rumors trickled in from passing smugglers about conquests and subjugations on distant worlds. High Lord Nyla Voss was said to be massing fleets, determined to root out his traitor daughter and her allies. Even in the hidden sanctuary, Jace felt the weight of an impending storm. The moment came sooner than expected. While Jace was fine-tuning a crystal-based reactor for the Starship, alarms resounded throughout the cavern complex. Seraphine scouts rushed in, breathless, reporting Dominion vessels breaching the Rift Belt. The time for secrecy had ended, or had come to them. In the main hall, the Seraphine leadership convened with Nyla, Jace, Mox, and Patch. Holographic projections revealed a sizable Dominion fleet weaving through the asteroid field. Though it moved cautiously, the force was formidable, enough to level the planetoid if left unchecked. "We have to stop them here," Nyla declared, gripping the hilt of her blade. "If they penetrate further, the Seraphine will be slaughtered." The Seraphine elder turned to Jace. "Our defenses are limited. We rely on the crystals to shield us from detection, but in open combat, we are outmatched." A hush fell as eyes turned to Jace, the so-called prophesied champion. He felt a surge of doubt, but also determination. He recalled the secret data Nyla carried, the stealth and infiltration technologies that her father intended to deploy. "We might not beat them head-on," he said slowly, "but we can disable their forces if we're clever." Patch beeped. "Do you have a plan, Jace?" Jace steeled himself. "Yeah. We have advanced crystals that can disrupt energy frequencies. If we can create a targeted pulse, we might disable the Dominion's weapon systems or shut down their reactors, at least temporarily." Mox perked up. "You want to rig an EMP-like discharge from the crystal infrastructure?" "Exactly," Jace nodded. "Using the Starship's emitter arrays, we can amplify the pulse. But we'll need time to set it up. And someone has to protect the planetoid from the vanguard." Nyla placed a hand on Jace's shoulder, her emerald eyes shining with fierce resolve. "I'll lead the Seraphine warriors to hold off the assault as long as we can. You handle the pulse." Jace took a steadying breath. "All right, let's get to work." In a whirlwind of preparation, the Seraphine labs hummed with activity. Crystals were gathered and tuned, placed in resonance chambers designed by Patch and overseen by the Seraphine engineers. Jace calibrated the ship's emitter so that once the crystals reached critical alignment, they'd unleash a wave capable of shorting out any advanced tech within range. The risk was substantial. If miscalculated, the pulse could fry their own systems or trigger a catastrophic feedback loop. But it was their best shot. Meanwhile, Nyla and the Seraphine warriors moved to intercept the first wave of Dominion attack craft that had landed on the planetoid surface. Through surveillance feeds, Jace caught glimpses of the fierce battle unfolding in the labyrinthine tunnels. Energy blades clashed, crystal-fueled silences flared, and the echo of war reverberated through stone corridors. Time blurred as Jace threw himself into the final calibrations. Mox rushed around, delivering essential components, while Patch chirped statuses in rapid-fire monotones. Each alarm from the battlefield updates made Jace's heart pound faster. He could hear every explosion, every cry. The walls felt as though they were closing in. "Ready," Patch finally announced. "We have 5 minutes before the crystals reach full charge." Jace exhaled. "Then let's power up the ship's emitter. Mox, get on the comms and warn our allies to shield themselves, bio-shielding or fallback positions. We can't let them be caught in the pulse." On it, Mox dashed away, shouting into a handheld transceiver. Outside, a muffled blast rocked the entire cavern, showering dust from overhead. Jace knew the Dominion forces must be closing in on the central hall. If they broke through before the pulse fired, it would be over. Finally, the crystals began to glow with an intense brilliance, pulsing in rhythm with a deep, resonant hum that vibrated in Jace's bones. The Starship's emitter rods rose from the hull, angled to direct the wave outward. Jace keyed in the final sequence, sweat trickling down his neck. 3, 2, 1, engage. A piercing tone filled the air, and a kaleidoscope of light erupted from the emitter, merging with the swirling energy of the crystals. For an instant, everything seemed to freeze. Then a blinding pulse rippled outward, passing through the cavern walls and expanding into the planetoid's atmosphere. In the aftermath, Jace's vision swam. He felt a weightless sensation, as though time had suspended. The crystal glow dimmed, and the air crackled with residual sparks. Then reality snapped back into focus. He fumbled over the console, searching the readouts. "Patch status." The droid's voice crackled. "Power fluctuating. External sensors offline. Wait, we're receiving partial data. Dominion warships in orbit are drifting. Their systems appear unresponsive." A shout of jubilation rose from the nearby Seraphine engineers. Jace slumped, relief flooding through him. They had done it. They'd disabled the Dominion's fleet. But what about the ground forces? Mox burst in. "Hair askew. They're retreating. The foot soldiers are panicking. No comms, no support from orbit. Nyla and the Seraphine are pushing them back." Elation surged in Jace's chest. He wanted to see it for himself. He sprinted out of the lab, weaving through the corridors until he reached the central hall. Smoke hung in the air, rubble strewn across the floor. Yet among the battered stone pillars, Seraphine warriors stood victorious. Dominion soldiers lay disarmed or pinned down. And at the center of it all was Nyla, blade lowered, chest heaving as she surveyed the fallen with grim resolve. Upon seeing Jace, her lips curved in a weary smile. "You did it," she said, voice trembling with exhaustion. "They're in full retreat." He stepped over the debris, heart pounding with relief and admiration. "We did it," he echoed, reaching her side. Before he could say anything else, a sudden movement flickered in his peripheral vision. One Dominion soldier lunged from behind a collapsed column, weapon raised, desperation blazing in his eyes. Jace barely had time to react before a bright flash tore through the air. He staggered, a burning sensation lancing his abdomen. Shock rippled through him as he realized he'd been hit. The soldier crumpled under a final strike from Nyla, but the damage was done. Darkness crept into Jace's vision, and he felt his legs give out. Nyla caught him, her expression twisting in horror. "Jace," she cried, pressing her hand against the wound. Blood seeped through his shirt, warm and terrifying. He tried to speak, but the words choked in his throat. The last thing he saw was Nyla's emerald face, tears brimming in her eyes, as the shadows claimed him. A beeping sound drew him from a deep, painless void. Jace's eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the bright overhead lights. He was in a med bay, clean, sterile, with advanced equipment that hummed softly. He blinked, disoriented, until he recognized Patch's silhouette hovering by the bedside. "You're awake," the droid said quietly. Vital signs stabilizing. The Seraphine's healing crystals augmented your recovery, and we transported you to a secure medical facility. Jace struggled to sit up, wincing at the soreness that coursed through his body. What? How long? Patch beeped. 1 week since the battle. You nearly died, Jace. Captain Nyla carried you back to the Starship with Mox's assistance. The Seraphine's advanced healing knowledge saved your life. He breathed a shaky sigh. What about Nyla? Is she all right? She is waiting outside, Patch replied. Shall I let her in? Jace gave a slight nod. Moments later, the door slid open, revealing Nyla dressed in a formal Nixery uniform, her posture still regal. Relief flooded her eyes when she saw him awake, and she came to his bedside, gingerly placing a hand on his arm. You're alive, she whispered. He tried a weak smile. Thanks to you, apparently. She squeezed his hand gently, then cleared her throat. I have news, Jace. The Dominion forces have withdrawn for the moment. Father's war fleet suffered a crippling blow thanks to your pulse. Many systems are rising up against his rule now that they see he can be beaten. His head spun with the weight of it all. So we won? Or at least, turned the tide. Nyla inclined her head. It's not over, but the galaxy has changed, and your part in it is known far and wide. The Seraphine spread word of the prophecy fulfilled. Other worlds rally to you as a symbol of resistance. An uncomfortable flush crept across Jace's cheeks. He'd never asked for any of this. I'm just a repairman, he murmured. I never wanted to be a hero. She managed a soft laugh. Yet here you are, hero and all. A beat passed, and her expression turned more serious. About the other matter. Jace blinked. Other matter? She glanced away, almost shyly, an expression that felt out of character for the stoic warrior. You offered me food on Farhaven, remember? On my world, sharing food is an ancient sign of engagement. My warrior sisters took it quite literally when they tracked me down. Under our customs, we are betrothed. A strangled laugh escaped Jace. You can't be serious. That was just a courtesy. In my culture, offering someone food is just being nice. Nyla's cheeks darkened. I know, but tradition among my people is absolute. They will hold you to it unless we formally annul our bond. And doing so can be complicated. Jace felt a rush of conflicting emotions, confusion, warmth, a strange sense of possibility. What do you want? He asked gently. She looked into his eyes. I have known only war and duty all my life. But these past weeks, something changed. I respect you, Jace Callen. More than that, I owe you a debt for your bravery, your kindness. I would understand if you wished to return to your old life, but He squeezed her hand, cutting off her words. My old life was a lonely workshop on a dusty station, with a sarcastic droid for company. I think it's time I moved on. He drew in a shaky breath. If that means standing by you, Nyla, then. I'm not saying I'm ready to plan a wedding, but I'm willing to give this a chance. A brilliant smile broke through her reserved facade. Very well, fiancé, she teased softly, though her voice was trembling with emotion. Jace's heart flipped. He'd never imagined himself in such a position, but life had a way of appending expectations. So what now? Patch, as if on cue, interjected from the corner. You have a galaxy to save, or at least keep from tearing itself apart. Nyla nodded, steel returning to her gaze. My father's forces have retreated, but he's not defeated. The Onyx Dominion remains powerful, and other factions sense weakness. The war could spread. We must rally allies, coordinate efforts, ensure that oppression doesn't simply shift hands. Jace sighed, carefully easing off the bed. He felt a dull ache, but it was tolerable. I guess that means I won't be going back to my quiet life anytime soon. She offered him a hand, helping him stand. Nor will I. Our fates are tied now, by honor and by choice. Mox peeked in from the corridor, a sheepish grin on his face. Knock, knock. You two decent? Word has it you're going to be the galaxy's power couple, literally. Nyla rolled her eyes, while Jace barked a tired laugh. We'll do our best, he said, half joking, half serious. Hand in hand, they stepped out into the corridor, greeted by a cluster of Seraphine well-wishers who bowed in reverence to the man they believed was prophesied to bring balance. Jace still felt an imposter's awkwardness under their adoring gazes, but he also felt something else, a spark of hope. Perhaps he wasn't a chosen one in any mystical sense, But he had made a difference, and with the help of Nyla and so many others, he could continue to do so. Outside, the stars beckoned, a vast tapestry of potential conflict, discovery, and wonder. Amid the swirling uncertainties, Jace felt the gentle, reassuring presence of Nyla by his side, their hands interlinked in a quiet promise. The galaxy was big, and the challenges ahead were daunting, but for the first time, Jace felt a genuine conviction that he had a purpose beyond fixing broken machines. He squeezed Nyla's hand, and together they walked forward, stepping onto the path that stretched far beyond his old workshop and into a future he never could have imagined. A future where an unlikely mechanic and an emerald-skinned warrior princess might just save the galaxy and find their own happiness along the way.